Hello, EMT students. This is Matt on the microphone. Uh, Testing this out here. We're going to be going over the human body. I'm going to be giving the lecture on this. This is very similar to the lecture that was given in class. I'm going to figure out a ways to record it so that it's pretty much identical, but we'll get into it. We'll talk about the human body. Note on here, these are all the knowledge objectives that the NREMT wants you to know. You can pause here if you want to read them all. And just feel free to pause at any point in time during the slideshow if you feel like I'm moving too fast and you want to slow down and review anything. Um, the NREMT, we're going to be teaching this based on what you need to know as an EMT to make sure that you have the safety and well-being of the EMT, the medical and legal and ethical care. Um, and we'll be talking about anatomy and physiology in this lecture of all human systems to the practice of EMS specifically. You can go a lot deeper into it. We're going to just start as kind of a touch point here. We do over the whole human body. And then remember, anytime you see the word pathophysiology, that patho means away from the normal, and then physiology just means the normal there. So patho is anything away from that normal physiology. During this slideshow, you'll see these. Let's see if I can get a better color there. These letters here, those correlate to the study sheet, which I've also just put up into the classroom there, excuse me. And so they're available there if you want to follow along. Those cheat sheets kind of help you figure out what's going on quickly, and so that you don't have to take notes on everything. They're different numbers based on which sheet you're on. So cheat sheet 1 is the first one, and then A is the spot on that sheet that correlates to whatever topic I'm talking about. So when we're talking about anatomy and physiology, we need to know some terminology. We need to know about anatomy, physiology, and then pathophysiology. We already kind of talked about pathophysiology, but anatomy is the structure of the body. So, like there's 4 chambers in the heart, and the physiology is how those 4 chambers then pump and or move or do an action to create blood flow throughout the body. And then pathophysiology is if something was going wrong with one of those chambers, that would move it away from normal function. Topographical anatomy, this is think of like a topographical map, the up and down. This applies to the body in anatomic position, where the patient is facing you with their arms at their side and their palms forward. Additionally, we will talk about the body in different planes, where we'll break it up into imaginary pieces or chunks. There's 3 main areas, 3 ways that we do it. We do it the coronal, which is the frontal plane, divides the body from front to back. This is like if you were to cut down the side of your body, versus the sagittal, which is the lateral plane, where it divides your body from left to right. And then with sagittal, there's another specific plane that we call the mid-sagittal plane, where we divide the body into equal left and right halves instead of it being somewhere not on the midline, where sagittal could be anywhere. Mid-sagittal is always directly on the midline of the body. And then transverse, this is like if you took somebody from the waist and cut them in half, or you could do it across the chest or anywhere that you're cutting where you have a top half of the body and a bottom half of the body. And it's not always directly in halves, and we don't always do it just for the body. Sometimes it's also done for organs to show you different views inside of an organ there. Here's that there where you have your front coronal plane here in the purple. Excuse me, in the purple there, where it's cutting it down the side. You have the sagittal over here that's cutting it in the middle, directly in the middle, and then you have the transverse that's cutting it side to side. So kind of doing something like that. When we talk about the human body, we start small. We talk about cells. These are the foundation of the human body. They're the smallest thing that exists inside the human body for it to still exist and be alive. After cells, we go up to things called tissues, and these are cells that have a shared function together. There are a whole bunch of cells working together. And then organs are a whole bunch of tissues coming together. And this might be in the heart, you have electrical tissue, you have muscle tissue, you have connective tissue that are all coming together to help do a similar job together and make that organ. And then organs themselves are a smaller chunk of much larger, what we call body systems. There's 11 body systems in a human, and they come together to form these 11 body systems. The first system that we talk about is the skeletal system. Gives us a recognizable human form, has 206 bones. This is a question that our EMT likes to ask you a lot. But that bones are then broken down into the axial skeleton, the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton, this is the foundation to which the arms and legs are attached. It has the skull, facial bones, the thoracic cage, and the vertebral column are all really important. I think these are the bones that are essential for life, that are essential for main body function. Joints, these occur whenever we have bones coming into contact with each other. They're the ends of the bones, and they're the connecting and supporting tissues. There's two main types of joints that the NREMT likes to talk about. They're the ball and socket joint and the hinge joint. Ball and socket is something like the arm or where the femur comes into the hip, where they're allowing for rotation, allow bending, versus hinge joints, which are like the knee, where they're just doing flexion and extension. Some other things to mention inside of joints here, that ligaments connect bone to bone, and that's kind of an important thing to know there. Each joint has kind of synovial fluid inside of it that keeps it lubricated and keeps it functioning well. Here's a picture of those joints and what they look like there. You can see your ball and socket on the left and your hinge joint on the right. The axial skeleton, kind of continuing on here, it's got the cranium, which is the top of the head there, made up of 4 bones, the parietal, frontal, temporal, and occipital. And the face is made up of 14 bones, 7 on each side that are kind of mirrored to each other. The spinal column has 33 bones, which we call vertebrae. They divide them into 5 sections: the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum, and coccyx. Something that's important too, they will probably ask you how many of these you have. There's 7 cervical, there's 12 thoracic, and there's 5 lumbar. And the way that I remember these, and the way that the example that I gave in class, is you got breakfast, call it breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm going to come back over here and do breakfast. And so that kind of helps me remember how many different vertebrae I have in each. But a total of 33. You have 5 in the sacrum, and then the remaining 4 in the coccyx there. The thorax is in the axial skeleton. It is 12 thoracic vertebrae and 12 pairs of ribs. Remember that for each thoracic vertebrae you have 2 ribs that come off of it. So you have 24 ribs total, 12 on each side. The thoracic cavity contains and protects the heart, the lungs, the esophagus, and the great vessels, things like the aorta and the superior and inferior vena cava. The appendicular skeleton, it has the arms, the legs, their connection points, and the pelvis. It includes the joints, the arms, which are the upper extremities, the pelvis, and then the legs, which are the lower extremities. Your upper extremities, these extend from the pectoral girdle, where the bones connect to the actual thoracic cage, all the way out to the fingertips. And moving down from the top, you have your arm, your forearm, your hands, and your fingers, moving from proximal to more distal. Your shoulder girdle has 3 bones that come together: the clavicle, the scapula, and the humerus. The clavicle is also called your collarbone, and the scapula is also called your shoulder blade, if you're looking for a little bit more colloquial or common usage of those terms. The arm starts at the humerus at the top, which is the supporting bone. The forearm has the radius and the ulna. The radius is on the lateral side, or the thumb side of a hand, and the ulna is on the medial side, or the pinky side. Remember this when you're thinking like radial pulse is on the radius, which is on the thumb side. The wrist and the hand, they have a ball and socket joint. The principal joints in there are the carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. The carpals are these wrist bones. The metacarpals are kind of after them. They're the bones that are not in the wrist. They're kind of like these ones here are metacarpals. And then phalanges are all of the bones in the hand. So like all of these are phalanges for each of these fingers. The pelvic girdle has two coxae, which are the hip bones, a sacrum and a coccyx, and each pelvic bone is formed by the fusion of three bones, the ilium, the ischium. And you can see it here that we have the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis there. So, and then this colored is really good there. On the bottom of that, those are formed to the sacrum there, and then they're also connected to the femur at the acetabulum there. We'll talk about the acetabulum coming up then. Another important thing here is the pubic symphysis, which is right in the middle there. This is the thing that separates on women during childbirth, but for most part, for our healthy, intact, non-childbearing individuals, this should be intact and healthy. Lower extremities, you have the femur, which is the longest bone in the body. If somebody presents with a broken femur, that is a significant mechanism of injury. That person went through a significant amount of force for that to happen. The femur connects into the acetabulum, which is the pelvic girdle, via a ball and socket joint. And then the greater and lesser trochanter of the femur are where the major muscles of the thigh connect to the femur. And anytime you see weird bones or processes or things like that on a bone, that is usually an attachment for muscle. Because that rough part, that sticking out part, has extra surface area. Moving down, you have the knee, which connects the upper leg to the lower leg. It has the kneecap in it, which is the patella, is the fancy word for the kneecap bone there. And then the lower leg has the tibia, which is on the anterior side of the leg, or the shin bone, and the fibula, which is on the more lateral side of the leg there. Good to know where your tibia is, especially if you ever have to do like assist with or do an OM on intraosseous infusions. That's a good one to know. The ankle, it's the lower part of the extremity there as a hinge joint and allows for the flexion and extension of the foot. The foot itself has 7 tarsal bones, and tarsals are the ankles. So think the carpals were the wrist, the tarsals are the ankles there, and then you have the metatarsals, which are halfway in between them, and then the phalanges on the end of the foot there. Some physiology of the skeletal system, or how it works. It gives the body its shape, protects fragile organs, allows for movement, helps to store calcium, and helps to create blood cells. So that is all of these things are functions of the skeletal system there. The musculoskeletal system, this is the muscles and the skeleton together, provides your form, your posture, allows for movement, and it protects the vital internal organs there. We have different types of muscles in the body. We have skeletal, which are your voluntary muscles that you can control, your smooth muscles, which are more like for organs, and your cardiac muscle, which is only found in one spot, which is the heart. Here's what your muscular system looks like there. You can see you've got lots of tendons and ligaments going on there. As the skeletal system contracts and relaxes, it allows for the body to move and manipulate its environment. It also, when it's doing this, produces heat, and most of our heat as adults comes from, or as humans, comes from muscle movement. Another thing that muscles provide is they are some padding that acts as a little bit of a shock absorber to protect structures underneath of them. The respiratory system, this is the one that is contributing to the process of respiration or the process of breathing. The upper airway includes the nose, the mouth, which we call the oral cavity, the tongue, the jaw, which is the mandible, the upper jaw is called the maxilla, the larynx, which is the voice box, divides the upper and lower airway. Moving along, you have the pharynx. Pharynxes are just spaces, so nasopharynx is just the space behind the nose, oropharynx is the space behind the mouth, and the laryngopharynx is the space around the voice box there. We also have the trachea, which is that ribbed kind of solid structure that you can feel in the neck that allows the airway to stay open. And then the epiglottis, that this kind of structure flaps between the trachea and the esophagus to keep that both they keep food out of the airway and airway out of the food. Moving down into the lower one here, you have the thyroid cartilage, which is the Adam's apple, and then the cricoid cartilage, which is below the thyroid cartilage. There's a membrane between the two, the cricothyroid membrane. The structure is this little space here between the two. The trachea itself ends at what we call the carina, which is the last of the little C cartilages there at the bottom, and then divides into the left and right bronchi, which then lead into the left and right bronchioles. Remember that anytime that we're in anatomy, you see like bronchi is the big thing, and then as it splits and gets smaller, it turns into something called bronchioles. These are like different connections here, but anything smaller usually gets the eoles in anatomy. So when we talk about artery and arterioles later, you'll know that arterioles are just smaller forms of. Two lungs in the body, they're held in place by the trachea, the windpipe, the arteries and veins, and then the pulmonary ligaments around it. It's divided into two lobes, a right lobe and a left lobe, and these are anatomically speaking on a human being. So you'd be looking at the right side as the right lobe, left side as the left lobe. The right lung has an upper, middle, and lower lobe, while the left lung only has two lobes, the upper and lower lobes. The reason for this is the apex of the heart there pokes just a little bit into the left side there, and there's not enough room for a third lobe of that left lung to originate. So we do not have a third lobe of the left. Within the lobe, you have the big bronchi that go smaller into bronchioles, and then go smaller even into alveoli. These really small alveoli allow for gas exchange. That's where it happens in the lungs. On the outside of the lungs, you have what's called a pleura. This is a layer of smooth, glistening tissue that covers each lung and lines the chest cavity. There's a small amount of fluid between the lungs and the chest cavity, and this is to keep things lubricated and allow that tissue to glide instead of snagging or ripping or tearing or catching in there. There's a picture of the lungs there. You can see the main bronchi getting smaller and smaller until they get out to the alveoli. For breathing, we use several muscles. The main muscle for breathing is the diaphragm. And in healthy, relaxed adults, most of the time it's the only muscle that we use for breathing. In other circumstances where we are a little bit need to put a little more work into breathing, we'll use things like the cervical muscles in the neck, intercostal or between the rib muscles, the abdominal muscles, and the pectoral muscles. Inhalation is a passive process in humans. When it happens, we have our diaphragm and our intercostal muscles contract, they get smaller, and the pressure in the thoracic cavity decreases. This decrease in pressure means that air from the outside is allowed to come in, and the lungs fill with air. And remember that this is the active part of the respiratory cycle. It takes energy to breathe in. Exhalation, on the other hand, is passive. It means the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles relax, the thoracic cavity returns to its normal shape and volume. This pushes air out, and it's a passive portion of the respiratory cycle. If somebody's showing effort in exhalation, you're in kind of a pathophysiology situation. Some physiology of the respiratory system. The function of the respiratory system is to provide the body with oxygen and eliminate carbon dioxide. Ventilation and respiration are two separate functions of the respiratory system, and the NREMT really wants you to know the difference between the two. Ventilation is the movement of air between lungs and the environment, and respiration is the exchange of oxygen and CO2 at the tissue level. So you could have one and not the other. You could have ventilation where you're breathing in lots of air from the environment, but that air is rich in carbon monoxide and you're not getting any oxygen from it. That wouldn't be respiration happening, but it would be happening. Respiration itself is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the alveoli and tissues, which provides oxygen to cells and removes the carbon dioxide from them. This happens through a process called diffusion, where it's a passive process in which molecules move from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Chemical control of breathing. Your brainstem controls breathing by monitoring carbon dioxide in blood and spinal fluid. As you get higher carbon dioxide levels, your brain says, hey, we need to breathe faster to get rid of this carbon dioxide. The primary reason and drive for you to breathe is to lower your carbon dioxide levels inside of the body. Now, if you get to a point where you're not doing this anymore, there's a secondary system called a hypoxic drive, which relies on low levels of oxygen. But for the most part, most humans and most adults are breathing based on levels. The medulla inside of the nervous system is a big part of this ventilation cycle. It's stimulated by high levels of carbon dioxide. And then, in additionally, the pons area has two areas that help you get respiration help during emotional or physical stress. Like we said, ventilation is moving air into and out of the lungs. It doesn't require there to be oxygen or carbon dioxide in either side of it. It requires the chest to rise and fall. You have to have that space and able to do so. Tidal volume is the amount of air moved into or out of the lungs during a single breath. This is typically 500 milliliters in adult males between the ages of 30 and 60. That's what your textbook kind of says is the average for all of these vitals. So just kind of take that as if you're not an adult male 30 to 60, it might be a little bit different. Residual volume, this is the amount of gas that remains in the lungs to keep the lungs open. Not all gas is expelled. Some of it is maintained to keep the lungs open. That breathing process. Dead space, this is a portion of the respiratory system that has no alveoli and where little or no gas exchange between air and blood occurs. This could be in the bronchioles, space between alveoli that are damaged, but it's just basically some amount of space in the lungs that doesn't have good oxygen absorbing ability. To find your minute volume, which is a calculation the NREMT likes you to know, take your respiratory rate, times it by your tidal volume, and you'll get your minute volume. Some things that look like normal breathing, you should have normal rate and depth, which we call that tidal volume there. You should have a regular rhythm or pattern of inhalation and exhalation. There shouldn't be any big, like 2 inhalations and then an exhalation, or really long inhalation and a really short exhalation. It should be kind of very normal there. When you listen in with a stethoscope on the chest, you should have clear audible breath sounds on both sides in all fields. And you should have regular rise and fall on both sides of the chest. If you don't, you're getting into something called paradoxical movement. We'll talk about that in a later lecture too, but that's a bad sign. That means that there's some ribs damaged and that you're not able to, those lungs are not able to inflate as they should be. Some other things that you'll see in normal breathing, especially in youngsters, is movement of the abdomen, present in adults in some capacity as well. On the flip side, if people are not breathing well, if there's an inadequate breathing pattern going on, you're going to have labored breathing. You're going to have muscle retractions using those accessory muscles. You're going to have pale, cyanotic, cool, damp skin. And this is another term that you should immediately pick up on when the NREMT says this, because what they're telling you when they say this is they're saying, hey, this person is probably experiencing signs and symptoms of shock. And you'll need to know that later when it comes up again. They might also be in tripod position, is an inadequate breathing, or agonal gasps. And these are usually breaths that are taken right after a person is deceased, where they're not really doing a lot of oxygen or carbon dioxide transfer. Moving on to the circulatory system, this is a complex arrangement of connected tubes that starts from the aorta, goes to arteries, arterioles, then to capillaries, then comes back through venules and veins, till it gets to the vena cava and back to the heart. There's 2 circuits of the circulatory system. There's the systemic circulation that's going to the whole body, and there's the pulmonary circulation that's going just to the lungs. This is what the circulatory system looks like in a human being. You can see that the blue is deoxygenated blood that's going through the body, or coming back to the heart, and then getting pumped to the lungs. And the red is oxygenated blood that's coming from the lungs and then getting pumped to the body. The heart itself is a hollow muscular organ. It's made of specialized cardiac muscle, and it works as a paired pump. Each side is divided into an atrium, which is the upper chambers, and the ventricles, which is a lower chamber. So you have 2 atrium and 2 ventricles, a left atrium, and a left ventricle, and a right atrium and a right ventricle. Circulation of the heart. The heart receives its blood from the aorta, the biggest vessel there. It goes through what we call the coronary arteries. The right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood, or blood that's low in oxygen, from the veins. And the left side receives oxygenated blood that's come from the lungs, and this oxygenated blood is then ready to get pumped to the systemic circulation so that the body can have the oxygen there. A good tip to remember here is that arteries take blood away from the heart and veins bring blood back to the heart. So an artery is always a normal resting heart rate for an adult is 60 to 100 beats per minute. Another thing that we talk about is stroke volume. This is the amount of blood moved by one beat. So one beat of the heart is the stroke volume. Your cardiac output is the amount of blood moved in a minute. It's kind of like the tidal volume that we talked about and the minute volume that we talked about in the respiratory system. And how you find this is you take your heart rate times your stroke volume equals your cardiac output. This is a good one to know. They really like to bring this one up on the NREMT. I've known several people to get a question that has something to do with heart rate and stroke volume and cardiac output for their. The heart has an electrical conduction system, and it allows it to do what we call autorhythmicity in the heart, but it has special tissue that is capable of initiating and conducting electrical current. It causes very coordinated contractions that produce a strong pumping action inside of it. Arteries carry the blood from the heart away from the heart to body tissues. The aorta breaks into the coronary arteries, which feed the heart itself. Remember that these guys are feeding the heart there. If I can draw a heart. The carotid arteries, which are going up to the brain. The hepatic arteries that are going to the liver. The renal arteries that are going to the kidneys. And the mesenteric arteries that are going to the intestines and the pancreas. The pulmonary artery, this is a weird one. It's the only artery that has blood that's deoxygenated in it, but it's moving it away from the heart towards the lungs. Arteries will branch into arterioles, and then those arterioles will break into capillaries. Capillaries are so small that only one blood cell can go through at a time, and they're kind of the middle point between arteries and veins. When we're looking at pulse, it's very easy to find the pulse at the neck, the wrist, and the groin, at the carotid, at the radial, and at the femoral pulses there. But pulse is created by the forceful pumping of blood out of the left ventricle and into the major arteries. So that actual pumping process is what creates feeling. Here are your different blood vessels and arteries in the body. There are lots of them. You don't need to know them all, but you can see that they are paired. So if you have you have something like a femoral artery, you probably have a femoral vein that runs right next to it. Capillaries, they connect these arterioles to venules. They're the end divisions of the arterial system, and it allows the contact between the blood and the cells. This is where you actually get oxygen getting offloaded from the blood and carbon dioxide getting the cells there. The veins are then going to take that oxygen-depleted blood, carry it back towards the heart. The superior vena cava is going to take all the blood from the head, neck, shoulders, and upper extremities and feed it back to the heart. And the inferior vena cava is carrying all the blood from the abdomen, pelvis, and lower extremities. And these are all coming together at the right atrium of the heart there. The spleen is a solid organ located under the rib cage on the left upper quadrant there. It filters blood, and it's really susceptible to injury from blunt trauma. It's really easy to rip or tear the spleen there. Your blood is made up of several different components. It has plasma, which is the liquid component, red blood cells, which are the erythrocytes, erythro meaning red, of course, if you remember from your medical terminology, white blood cells with leuco meaning white, and then platelets, which are not a cell, but they're a chunk of organic matter that are floating through there and that help to form clots when the body gets hurt. Some physiology of the circulatory system. Blood pressure, this is the pressure that the blood exerts over the walls of the artery. You have the systolic and diastolic. The systolic is the top number, and the diastolic is the bottom number. But systolic is when the left ventricle of the heart contracts, and it pumps blood from the ventricle into the aorta. And the diastolic is when the muscle of the ventricles relax and the ventricle fills with blood. So it's the amount of pressure that's in the system at any point in time. And then the systolic is the maximum. And so, like this example here, 120 over 60, we always write systolic over diastolic there. So systolic is your high point, diastolic is your low point. For circulation in adults, normal circulation is automatically adjusted and controlled. We talk about this word perfusion a lot for the NREMT. You'll need to know this one. This is the circulation of blood and organ or tissue in adequate amounts to meet the needs of the cell. And then you also need to know what hypoperfusion is. And this is just the inadequate blood supply to organ, cell, tissues, and cells. But both are very important topics there to consider. Inadequate circulation in adults, you can have small amounts of blood loss, small cuts and scrapes and things like that. Your vessels will constrict and your heart will pump more rapidly to continue getting that blood, the remaining blood that you have, to pump faster through the system. With a large loss, the body tries to compensate and it can't, and so the patient goes into shock. Mean arterial pressure is something that we can use to help determine shock. We'll teach you how to calculate that, but all of those are pieces of that puzzle there for circulation. Blood itself has lots of different functions. These are the white and red blood cells together. Like, they can fight infection, transport oxygen, transport carbon dioxide, control pH, transport nutrients and wastes, and then clotting factors there. And that's the platelets that are doing the clotting. And then the white blood cells, WBCs, the leukocytes that are fighting the infection, which means all of these things are red blood cells, erythrocytes, RBCs. The next system we're going to talk about is the nervous system, nervous system's control of the cardiovascular system. So the sympathetic nervous system, also called your fight or flight nervous system, sends response to the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands then either produce epinephrine or norepinephrine. Both of these are hormones that are secreted to stimulate your heart to beat faster and your blood vessels to constrict, give you that ability to fight off or run from stressful stimulus. In your blood and on your body, you have different receptors. These things have either an alpha adreneric or beta adreneric response, depending on what type of cells they have and what type of receptors they have. The NREMT does like to ask questions about these, so know that your blood vessels have alpha adrenergic receptors and your heart and lungs have beta adrenergic receptors. Some other things that control the cardiovascular system are baroreceptors, which sense pressure. Think like baro, like barometer. Same base word there, same prefix. And that your sympathetic, your fight or flight, and your parasympathetic, your rest and digest nervous system balance each other out. So they're both, if you get into a fight or flight scenario, it starts to wean off and the parasympathetic nervous system starts to jump and cancel that. Now, the nervous system is perhaps one of the most complex organs in the body. You have the brain, spinal cord, all the nerves in the body, lots of different sensors that tell you lots of different things. We divide the nervous system into two portions: central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And we're going to break each of those down a little bit further. But think of the central nervous system as kind of like the axial skeleton there, where it's like all the important body structures, and then the peripheral nervous system is all the limbs and appendages and sensors on faraway parts of the body. So the brain is the controlling organ of the body. It has the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Cerebrum is the biggest part of the brain, and then the brainstem is kind of the more primitive part. The brainstem does go through the occipital, the foramen magnum and the occipital bone there, and so it's an important part there, but that's why injuries to the base of the skull are so detrimental. On the brain, you have cerebrospinal fluid, which cushions and protects the brain and spinal cord. It's a yellowish color. How you get oxygen up there is you get oxygen blood supplied via the carotid arteries, and then deoxygenated blood and wastes are drained by both the internal and external jugular veins. The spinal cord is an extension of the brainstem, and it transmits down to the rest of the body. And it's a big, long, think of it as like an extension cord between the brain and the body, where it's taking information and it's moving it both ways, up and down there. The peripheral nervous system is divided into two parts, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Nervous system transmits signals from your brain to your voluntary muscles, allows you to move your musculoskeletal system, and to get that kind of things moving there. Things like walking, talking, riding are all happening in there. The automatic nervous system on the other side is your involuntary actions, and it's split into two areas as well, where we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight, and your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest, slows the body system. In the peripheral nervous system, there's two types of nerves. There's sensory nerves that carry information from the body to the central nervous system, and there's motor nerves that carry that information from the CNS back out to the muscles to affect whatever change you want to happen there. The integumentary system, this is the skin. There's two layers to it. There's the epidermis, which is the really superficial layer of this, and then there's the dermis, which is below the epidermis there. And remember that epi means on top of, so epidermis means on top of the dermis. Beneath the dermis, we have subcutaneous tissue. Beneath there, this is fat, it has energy reserves, it has blood supply, all that's coming from that dermis there. Here's kind of a picture of what's going on with the integumentary system. There's lots of organs and things inside of here, sweat glands, hair follicles, pores, all of these things are connected, but it's a really large portion of the body. It's the largest single organ by surface area, and it has, because of that, it has three major functions. It protects the body in whatever environment you're in, it regulates body temperature, and it transmits information from your environment that you run into to your brain. Touch, heat, pressure, cold, all of those signals are traveling through the skin and giving your brain a better picture of what's going on. The digestive system is one big tube. The gastrointestinal system, it's found inside the abdomen for the majority of it. The abdomen is the second major body cavity, and it has the major organs of both digestion, excretion, things like urination and stuff like that. It's organized into four quadrants: the right upper quadrant, the lower upper quadrant, the left upper quadrant, the right lower quadrant, and the left lower quadrant. And then the kidneys and pancreas lie in the abdominal cavity, which we call the retroperitoneal cavity. Here's what that digestive system looks like. You can see the esophagus brings it down to the stomach. Things go through the stomach to the small intestine. The small intestine goes to the large intestine. Large intestine goes to the rectum, which is a holding thing, and then the rectum eventually bleeds out into the anus there. Some things I want to point out here: you've got the appendix over here. So if you have a patient presenting with right lower quadrant pain, that might be a sign there that we're dealing with something like that. The spleen is on the left upper, another one that's kind of a weird one. And then the liver, which also can get ruptured pretty easily, is in that right upper quadrant there. And it's a really big organ. It takes up a lot of space inside that right upper quadrant. If you've got like midline navel pain, like that can be the appendix there. But also, like, there's a ton of intestines in there, so you could have some diverticulitis or other kind of stomach, bowel, blockage or something else going on. So in order, things go through your digestive system, through the mouth, through the lips, the cheeks, the gums, the teeth, and the tongue. You have salivary glands that help to lubricate and start to digest things. It passes through the oropharynx, that space behind the mouth, between it and the larynx, goes down the esophagus, goes into the stomach. After it leaves the stomach, the pancreas will inject enzymes. The liver will inject bile that goes through the gallbladder. At this point in time, this is all dumping into the small intestine. So the liver and pancreas dump into the small intestine. The small intestine dumps into the large intestine. Large intestine into the large intestine has the appendix hanging off of it, kind of attached, but not really food going through there. And then the rectum is a big holding organ before things are actually excreted out of the body. The small intestine does most of the digestion. You do have alcohol and aspirin are being absorbed in the stomach. The rest of it's being absorbed in the small intestine. And then the large intestine is a little bit of vitamins, but mostly it's absorbing water that's left over at the end of this process. So physiology here, your stomach gets stuff added to it. You get these enzymes are added by your salivary glands, the stomach, the liver, the pancreas, the small intestine. And then we use these enzymes to break down sugars and food into sugars, fatty acids, and amino acids. This is further processed by the liver and then circulated via blood throughout the body. Your brain, for example, needs glucose. It can't use any kind of blood sugar, and so anything that has to be given to the brain has to be converted to glucose first before it can then be transported to the body. The lymphatic system is a really cool system. It consists of the spleen, the lymph nodes, the lymph itself, which is a fluid, lymph vessels, the thymus glands, and then some other. Lymphatic system supports the circulatory system and the immune system. Lymph itself is a thin, straw-colored fluid, carries oxygen and nutrients to cells and waste products away from cells. It also helps to rid the body of toxins and other harmful materials. It's kind of the catch-all when fluid leaks outside of the circulatory system. The endocrine system, this is a complex message and control system. It integrates many of the body's functions together, but it is a hormone system where we have hormones that are directly released into the bloodstream. Things like epinephrine, norepinephrine, insulin, glucagon are all inside of this endocrine. The brain controls the release of these. You also have the adrenal glands that are big on these, and then the sex organs, whether it's the ovaries for female or the testes for male, that are important in these. But any excess or deficiencies in hormones leads to that pathophysiology, which can cause. The urinary system controls the discharge of certain waste materials filtered from the blood by the kidneys, usually your nitrogenous wastes. It also helps to control fluid balance in the body, get rid of excess fluid, get rid of excess sugar, get rid of excess salt. It helps to filter and eliminate waste, and it controls your pH balance and helps with that system. The organs of the urinary system are the kidneys, the ureter, and the urinary bladder, where the kidneys fill up with liquid. They filter the liquid out. It filters down through the ureter to the to the bladder. The bladder swells up and stores that, and then eventually when it needs to be expelled, it goes through the ureter the outside. Genital system, you have a male and female. The male system consists of the testicles, the epididymis, the vasa deferentia, which moves sperm from the testicles to the outside. The prostate gland, seminal vesicles, and the penis itself is an organ inside of this. Here's what it looks like. It's very complex. A lot of what you're doing as an EMT will be only if there's outside trauma. You won't really be dealing with a lot of the inside trauma. The female genital system is the ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, cervix, and vagina. Most of the time, we'll talk about, there's lots of different female reproductive issues that can happen. They get its own chapter later on, as well as neonates and pregnancy and all that also gets its own chapter. So we will talk about this system again, but here is a picture of that. The rest of this kind of talks about some needs of the body. All cells in the body require certain things. They require oxygen and nutrients. They require the removal of waste material. The circulatory system is the big carrier of all of these supplies and all of these wastes, whether it's getting it from the respiratory system as oxygen and then dropping off waste at the kidneys to then be excreted out through the urethra. If something happens in between this chain and we have interference of any of this, cells start to become damaged. Cells use oxygen to turn nutrients into chemical energy through a process called metabolism. Aerobic metabolism uses oxygen. And when that's not available, cells will switch to anaerobic metabolism, which does not use oxygen. Remember that anaerobic means without. So without aerobic, without oxygen. Movement of oxygen, waste, and nutrients happens by diffusion, meaning things are moving from a high concentration to a low concentration. The higher the concentration, the faster the movement. pH is very critical to diffusion. Blood pH inside of the human body is 7.35 to 7.45 in homeostasis. Anything outside of that turns into pathophysiology. Your body spends a lot of energy to maintain a healthy pH and to make sure that everything in your system is staying at that homeostasis. Some pathophysiology here. This is the study of functional changes when we're reacting to disease. Respiratory compromise is the inability of the body to move gas effectively. You have hypoxia, which is low O2. And you have hypercarbia, which is high CO2. Both great examples of things that can happen for compromise there. Some things that impair ventilation and block some of these processes are blocked airways. Muscles of breathing are impaired. We have airway obstructed physiologically through asthma, emphysema, COPD, or other factors. Some other factors that impair respiration are change in the atmosphere, smoke inhalation, particle inhalation, high altitudes, anything above 10,000 feet. Humans start to have a little bit more difficult time pulling oxygen out of the air. At that height, the pressure goes down, and it's a lot harder to diffuse that oxygen across your cells. And you also have impaired movement of gas across cell membranes, whether it's from another gases in there like carbon monoxide or something else happening to prevent that. Your VQ ratio here, this is how much gas is being moved effectively through the lungs, and then how much blood is moving around the alveoli there. These things have to match up. You have to have enough of it going. If you have a mismatch of one of them, you're going to have something abnormal. And the VQs is ventilation and perfusion. So this is the amount of air coming into the lungs, and then how much of that is actually taking off oxygen and taking off CO2 off of the blood and putting on oxygen onto the blood. If you have respiratory compromise, your oxygen levels fall, your carbon dioxide levels rise, your respiratory rate increases. Increased CO2 means you breathe harder to try to breathe that carbon dioxide off. Your blood becomes more acidic with increased CO2. This sends commands to the body to breathe, and the cells start to move from aerobic respiration to anaerobic respiration, which is less energy, creates lactic acid, and is overall more acidic. If this continues to happen, you start to get into what's called shock. And this is a thing that happens when your organs and tissues don't receive enough oxygen. You're getting hypoperfusion. Impaired oxygen delivery can cause cellular hypoxia, and based on whatever signs and symptoms you've got and whatever the cause is, we categorize shock into different kinds. It gets its own chapter. We'll talk about it again, but it is noteworthy here and important to kind of bring the concept to your attention early. Some effects of shock on the body: the level of oxygen supplied to tissue falls. The cells engage in anaerobic metabolism. You get severe metabolic acidosis. You get the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine, trying to increase your blood pressure as you're starting to lose blood pressure. Your heart rate increases, trying to give more fluid, pass it through. And interstitial fluid starts to move into the capillaries to give more blood volume. All this is the body's attempt to keep enough fluid going long enough to keep your tissues. If the cellular metabolism becomes impaired, if you can't use oxygen and glucose at the cellular level, the cells create energy through anaerobic metabolism. This makes lactic acid, which can result in metabolic acidosis. And like we mentioned earlier, your brain can't use dextrose or lactose or galactose or anything like that. It can only use glucose, so it cannot use any alternative fuels. If this happens long enough, cellular injury may become irreversible. And so that's the goal of the EMT, is to get oxygen on board, to get fluids on board if it's available, and to really keep this person going in a healthy way. That's the end of this. That's the conclusion of this chapter. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you enjoyed it, I hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something. And we'll see you. We'll talk to you in the next one.